Assalamualaikum, everybody. Hello, and welcome to another episode of our year-long Facebook Live series exploring our intersections, where Smile discusses the
Apologies, just facing some technical difficulties right now. Give us a few minutes, please.
sorry, I think we cut off. But the topic for today's session is Idle No More, Resisting and Healing Colonialism and Ableism with the amazing Lexi Tokhi. In this episode, we are extremely excited to have guest speaker Lexi Tokhi, a passionate disability advocate and third-year specialized honors cognitive science student at York University. Lexi has been a member of many committees and councils and is a soon-to-be co-chair of the Children Treatment Network's Family Advisory Committee. She is active in her community and acts as a mentor to youth with disabilities. Lexi, we are so happy to have you here with us. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
Me too. So, without further ado, we can just go straight into it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, who you are, what you do, and what motivated you exactly to get into the work that you do now?
Sure. Before I do that, I'll just give a brief description of myself for anyone who is visually impaired or would need a description. So my name is Lexi. I have curly, but it's not looking so good right now, hair, dark hair. I'm wearing glasses. I have a red pillow behind me and I'm wearing a blue shirt. So that's my description. And as Nida said, I'm an undergraduate student at York University. I'm majoring in cognitive science. I am an avid disability activist and advocate. I'm still starting, but I've done a lot of work within my community and within different organizations like CTN, Children's Treatment Network, Holland Blurview. I'm also Afghan Canadian. My parents are from Afghanistan and I'm Pashtun. I was born in Canada and I have two siblings. I'm the oldest of three. I have Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome and I have a rare type of it, which I think under 30 people in the world have the same type as me. So it's pretty rare. And this condition affects a lot of parts of me. Mainly, like it affects my mobility. I'm a part-time walker user and a part-time wheelchair user. The main thing about this condition is that it's a connective tissue disorder. So it affects my connective tissues like collagen, especially, which makes me very prone to injuries. And basically, I have like tissue paper skin. So sometimes that gets in the way of things. But ironically, I'm like a very outgoing, like trying everything type of person. I'm a Sagittarius, of course. So when I was younger, like my parents never like said no to me. Like I did karate,
Wow.
which which it's kind of funny that I would do karate because like I'd get the biggest bruises afterwards, but I still loved doing it. I would do swimming, theater. I was like always one of those people who are like on the go, never at home. Yeah, so having like this upbringing and having parents who themselves were immigrants and fleeing like a war-torn country and didn't have, the experiences I do, my parents still always gave me freedom to choose whichever path I want and to uh be able to experience like any experience I can. And that like even if something seems like I can't do it due to my disability, like they'd always find a way around it just so that I could say I have that experience. And that's something I really appreciate about them because I know like in our cultures sometimes children with disabilities are kind of like kept as like this, secret or like a hush hush topic or kind of put to the side like, oh, no, don't look at her. That's like pray for her and stuff like that. But my parents are always like making sure I can do whatever I want. I'm always a point of bragging to them, which is kind of bad. But they always give me and my siblings an experience, like to have any experience we need. And this has influenced me a lot to like take the path of advocacy because despite like, you know, being Muslim, being like a Pashtun woman, being someone who has immigrant parents, being a woman, having a disability, these are a lot of things that do make it difficult for me to be able to go out there and experience what I want, but I'm still have a lot of privileges like living in Canada, which of course Canada has a lot of work to do, but I'm still privileged to live here and live with a good family. So I try my best to use like my voice and my platform to like talk about disability because often it's not something that's talked about. And when it is talked about, it's usually not in a realistic or like positive light. So that's what kind of inspires me to do what I do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Um, it's so nice to hear that you have such a great support system, your family, and you were involved in so many activities growing up. You were able to experience so much and continue to experience so much. Can you share some of your intersectional experiences? So you talked a little bit about this, but maybe we could talk a bit more in detail. So as a Pashtun woman with a disability, what barriers have you encountered or observed while navigating through society given your intersection? So this could be in education spaces, workplaces, and within the community.
Yeah. So I think intersectionality is like a very important topic that, especially with disability, like a lot of people who have disabilities experience intersectionality. And like my experiences as a woman, like a woman of color and a woman who's like Muslim, a woman who's like a child of immigrants is very different from other people who have disabilities and don't have these identities. So I think this is a very important topic, and like having my extended identities from being disabled really impacted how I had to navigate through life. And something like that really stood out to me is, as I said before, like I want to try everything. Like I was a part of like every committee, every club in school, student council, all that. But sometimes like I was treated as an afterthought because of my disability. And sometimes like people had to say, no, I'm sorry, you can't do this thing because we didn't think about your wheelchair. We didn't think like how we could integrate you into what we're doing. And that was a huge barrier for me. Like, not only does my condition cause barriers like chronic pain and all that stuff, but I feel like sometimes other people cause more barriers and their like own ignorance and bias and discrimination, and just simply like not knowing how to have an inclusive space with someone with a disability. And oftentimes, like, I would be the only person in like the whole room or the whole school or building that would like be in a wheelchair or use a walker or have a disability. And this could be very isolating for me because I had no one to relate to. And most like growing up, people would often like speak over me and speak for me, especially in school, with what I could do and what I couldn't do. And also, I felt like because my parents were like immigrants and they didn't know, you know, the systems that Canada has and the resources and the supports that were available, this kind of held me back sometimes because I wasn't getting the help that I needed a lot of the times, even though like especially in elementary school, some of my like white classmates or you know my more privileged classmates that had like disabilities, whether it was intellectual or physical, whatever, they would have like an EA years before me, or they would have extra time on tests years before me. But for me, I had to like figure that all out by myself, and my parents had to figure it out, and they didn't have like the immediate connections that other people had. And also like at the time they had the language barrier, but fortunately now they're like a lot more well versed with the language. But at the time it was like a huge barrier for us because I wouldn't even have an EA in class to help me with things, so I had to do everything by myself. I didn't have a mobility aid. I was just, you know, had to sit on the sidelines most of the time, uh while my classmates got to do like whatever they wanted to do. And I feel like because of this, some people thought I was getting special treatment by sitting on the sidelines, but really it was kind of like, you know, looking into a window and like seeing everyone being able to live their life freely, and you were just sitting there isolated and stuff. And I also feel like although like my name is Lexi, that's not a very ethnic name. So I do get a lot of privilege from that. And my skin color is like lighter and stuff. So I do have a lot of privilege that I'm very aware of, and I try to use it to my best to advocate for people who don't have these privileges. But even with that, I did face like my challenges due to my disability, my gender, of like being a woman, and uh, how like my parents came to be in this country. And along with that, sorry,
No, that's
um,
okay.
I'm also like very active in my community. And like growing up, I didn't really get to go like have the full Muslim experience because a lot of like mosques were not accessible, and a lot of like Quran classes, they were always in the basement with under a huge flight of stairs. And I could never go down those stairs, or like I would, but my mom would have to like hold my hand and it'd be so difficult. So I feel like it also causes a barrier in that aspect too, which I get it, like they can't they can't control their buildings and stuff, but it kind of like is a bit disappointing because in our religion we're supposed to be inclusive of everyone and thinking of everyone, and most of the time like my needs were kind of an afterthought, and like this wasn't considered from the beginning that someone with a disability could possibly want to be like immersed in their religion. So that would also caused a barrier for me.
That must have been so challenging in these spaces that are meant to be inclusive and safe, sorry, for everyone, like in your school, in the mosque, and to have these barriers that people are kind of ignorant to and not trying to learn more about it. Um, and just hearing how you're able to acknowledge your privilege in these instances still just gives credit to your incredible force of nature and your positive spirit. So thank you for sharing everything. How would you say these intersections have shaped your perspectives?
So these intersections shaped my perspectives by like lived experience is a very, very valuable thing. And having these lived experiences, I often felt like my identities sometimes contradicted with each other. Like being Afghan, we're like party animals, you know. If you've been to an Afghan wedding, like you see they like jump around, dance, do the atan and stuff. And having a disability, like I can't do those things. And that's something that I've accepted of myself, but sometimes it is a bit difficult. So when I can do something, I try to do it, but sometimes I simply can't. And that's something I've accepted, but I feel like a lot of people in my life haven't accepted, and a lot of people focus on the things that I cannot do. And sometimes they look at me and like, kind of like, oh, poor her, she can't do this thing, or they create this whole like narrative about me that I'm just like this sad little girl sitting in my room all day crying because I have a disability. And of course, like I have those moments, and I've like everyone, I guess, has those moments sometimes. But you know, life is life, and we don't always have time for that, or like we shouldn't let that stop us from doing what we want to do. And especially like being a student, I'm like a slave to academia, basically. Like I'm an honors, whatever student title I gave you, and I I constantly like put all my energy into that because sure I can't be like a basketball player or a skier or whatever, but there are things that I can put my energy to, and I try to focus on that more than focus on what I can't do. Um Along with that, of course I encounter like some forms of discrimination or ignorant people in my life, and sometimes it would take a toll on my um like self-image or my like how I see myself. And like for instance, once in high school I was with my friend, and this was like I just moved, so I didn't really know anyone that well, but a teacher like came up to us and asked my friend if I was her co-op like assignment.
Wow.
Yeah. So that like back then I was very timid, and like I didn't know what to say. Like I was just shocked. I didn't say anything, but it kind of opened my eyes to like how people see me, and no matter like what achievement I have, how much effort I put into how I look or anything, like they will just always see like that poor little girl in a wheelchair before they see like anything else about me. And sometimes that is like a huge thing for me that um that kind of like changes my like perception of myself, right? But I also have to realize that they've probably not taken the time to meet someone with a disability, or they've only like been exposed to like what the media shows us, which is like stereotypes and very inaccurate portrayals. And although it's not my job to educate people, I still, if I don't want to face these types of situations in the future, I should say something, or I should like show them, you know, like, hey, that's not right. Because sure, they can say that to me, but if they say that to someone else who's in a more vulnerable position and who's not as, you know, self assured as I am, that could really impact how someone sees themselves. And also, as I mentioned before, I'm an older sister, right? And both of my siblings also have disabilities. So when I face things like that, I always think of them and how they would react in those situations. And I try to be like a good role model for them. Although sometimes it is difficult because these things do hurt my feelings, like random people coming up to me and asking me, oh, what's wrong with you? Or like expecting me to say my whole medical history to them, or like asking like these invasive questions, or saying like, oh, if I was in your shoes, I don't know how I could live with myself. Like, you're such an inspiration. I couldn't do it. And things like that. But I just have to remember that, like, this is just what God has given to me. And I was put like here for a reason. And whatever that reason may be, I need to like stand up for myself and stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves, even though I can barely stand, but figuratively stand up for myself. So yeah, that's how my intersections shaped my perspectives.
That's amazing, Lexi, mashallah. You're incredibly emotionally intelligent and empathetic, I must say, especially these experiences where people are interacting with you in, they might think, not so harmful ways, but the impacts are so negative, and can be very unhealthy and toxic. And for you to take those as learning experiences and to make sure those who are in similar situations don't go through the same experiences that you have. It's extremely inspirational, and just goes to show how you are just gravitating towards such great leadership roles. So thank you for everything. How would you say, in line with our topic today, how does colonialism and ableism intersect in today's society?
So colonialism and ableism have a long standing history in teaming up to oppress people. Uh, a lot of the time people think like ableism is, you know, something that only a small percentage of people face, and that you're never going to face it when, like, in your lifetime if you're not disabled. But that's not true. Like, anyone at any point can become disabled and experience it. And especially with colonialism, people of colonized countries are way more likely to face ableism than people here. And even here we have, well, this is also a colonized country, but so we often don't think about like how ableism is a part of the conversation of colonialism, not just like physical health, but also mental health is strongly impacted by colonialism. And um, uh, this is like something that we need to have more of a conversation about. And unfortunately, we can still see like the impacts of colonialism and ableism in today's society, like with a lot of diagnostic testing. For example, like with autism or ADHD, we see that most people who are diagnosed with these are usually like white men, even though there's a huge percentage of women of color who also have these conditions, or like have these, and they are kind of dismissed because these diagnostic testings were not created to keep like people of color or women in mind. A lot of these frameworks are centered around, you know, the majority, I guess, or what's considered like, you know, the norm in society. And this is something that is still in effect to this day. And not to get on the topic of vaccines, but I, like personally, I've been vaccinated both doses, but a lot of people of color are, you know, scared to get vaccinated because there's such a huge history of, you know, being mistreated, being treated as like lab rats or test animals. And we need to acknowledge that before we, you know, say, oh, everyone get this vaccine, do your part. But we need to acknowledge, you know, not too long ago, we were used like, well, not we, but like um, people of color were used as, you know, test animals for these things. And of course, they have like their reservations about it. And that doesn't mean like that they're anti-vax or that they're uneducated, things like that. It just means that we need to acknowledge this and assure them that, you know, this vaccine is meant for everyone. And along with that, I see with colonialism and ableism that there's a lot of like disconnect between modern medicine or Western medicine and, you know, like what immigrants are used to. And I feel like when you, like for a, my family, for example, when my parents would go to the doctors when I was young and, you know, couldn't speak for myself, they were met with these huge words that like only doctors would understand. And they were never given like the comfort or clarity of what these things mean. And, you know, for new parents, hearing that your child has like this thing and that thing and needs to do this test, it's scary. And I'm sure a lot of um, parents who are like immigrants or who are not as well versed with Western medicine can be scared with these things. And this might even cause them to be, you know, not ashamed, but a little bit like, why does my child have to be like this? Why do we have to deal with all of these like huge words and constant testing, and none of this makes sense? So I think like people don't realize that that has to do with colonialism. And although Western medicine is very effective and, you know, has helped a lot of people, we treat it as like the most like higher, like the best thing ever, and everything else is just, you know, uneducated tribal medicine that like it doesn't work and doesn't make sense. But that's not true. Like a lot, like sometimes my mom, she gives me like 7 cups of tea a day. she she's like starting a tea addiction for me or something. But she does her research and she's like, oh, this tea helps for this thing, this tea helps for this thing. Who knows if it actually works? But to her, that's what she grew up with and that's what she knows. And it does help me a bit. But if you would tell this to someone like a doctor, they'd be like, oh, no, you're just looking off of things from the internet. And instead, you have to give your child like this huge list of medication because this is the only way. And that can be like very discouraging and overwhelming for parents. So that's my understanding of like how colonialism and ableism connect. And also along with that, people think like Canada is this like very developed country and, you know, everyone's welcome here and it's all sunshine and rainbows. But living as a disabled woman here, it's not. Like we have so much money in Canada, but like the sidewalks aren't even accessible. And constantly like little things that could be easily fixed are never fixed, even if you do speak up about it. And sometimes that makes it exhausting because like I always try to speak up about things, but they never get fixed. So what's the point? You know? And I think that if they just focus on that a bit more rather than saying, oh, we have an accessible sticker here, so that means like everything's good and we're such a progressive accessible country because we provide accessible parking that sometimes other people park in illegally. But there's little things like that that kind of contribute to, you know, the facade that we have like this such progressive and accessible country.
I definitely agree. I think you touched on some insightful and great points, especially, in our education and healthcare spaces. We really need to start adopting more holistic practices and taking into account all of these intersectionalities that people experience, and bring solutions that way. And that's why having voices from people with lived experience speaking about these things is so important to inform decision making. How would you say that we can resist discrimination based on ethnicity and ability in all spaces?
Um, so as I kind of touched upon earlier, most discrimination stems from a lack of representation and hesitation of having difficult conversations. So, in order to resist discrimination based on ethnicity or ability, um, like non-disabled or non-ethnic people should be open to like hearing that, okay, you're doing this wrong. And that doesn't mean that we're trying to attack them or say we're demanding an apology, but we just want someone to listen and be like, okay, we're doing this wrong. How can we fix it? How can we make it better? And kind of like put that disabled person or that person of color or both in some cases at the forefront and make them the decider of their what they need to feel more accepted in these spaces and more accommodated for and everything. And along with that, I think that you shouldn't feel guilty necessarily for having biases and contributing to discrimination. Of course, like you should have empathy and stuff, but of course, a lot of people don't realize these things. But as soon as you do realize, you should work towards like creating a more inclusive environment and not being so quick to uh like I guess apologize. Like you should definitely apologize, but sometimes that can be taxing on like the minority group because then we're spending all our time like comforting you and saying, "No, you didn't mean it like that." And I know you're actually a good person. You're not an ableist or you're not racist. You just made a mistake. And although for like that person, it may be comforting to hear that, for us, it can be very exhausting because the conversation should really be about, how to make things more inclusive for us. Yes, you did something wrong, but how are you going to move forward from that?
I definitely agree with that. I never thought about it that way, actually, people apologizing and it taking away from the movement and spending time and energy comforting those who are trying to support the cause. So that's really interesting that you bring that up. And at Smile, we're always trying to better ourselves and be as supportive as we can, be better allies. How would you say Smile can, as an organization, and even as a community, tackle these intersectional barriers and make a positive difference?
Well, first of all, I want to say that Smile is doing an amazing job with this. They're constantly amplifying Muslim and disabled voices, which are two identities that are often ignored and pushed to the side and othered. So I think you're doing an amazing job, not just amplifying disabled voices, but also Muslim voices. I do notice in like disability advocacy that a certain type of look and a certain type of like ability is kind of more put to the top when it's advocacy, something like more palatable, someone that's not who's disabled but not too disabled, or privileged but not too privileged, and something that's more for like abled people rather than like disabled people to relate to. But I think with Smile, you guys do an amazing job with, you know, actually hiring disabled people, which a lot of organizations that claim to be activists don't do. And along with that, you also connected to like Islam and Muslim people and like people of color and immigrants, and have like this whole like spectrum of identities that you represent and cater to. So that's honestly like really inspiring and amazing. And even before this, like my friend Maria, she works for you guys, and I was always watching your live videos and following your Instagram, and I think you guys are doing an amazing job. um I think it's just important to continue having these conversations, and like maybe when COVID is over, inshallah, having like, I don't know if you already do this, but having workshops in mosques, that it might be a good way to teach your community about intersection and inclusive language, and how they can better, you know, uh, integrate people with disabilities into their spaces, and how to make their spaces more accessible, and even like teaching them, I guess, how to like converse with people with disabilities, not like actually talk, but I mean the language they use, and you know, not jumping straight away to saying, oh, I'll pray for you, or stuff like that, because of course I'd always accept someone praying for me, but it's kind of a backhanded thing to say sometimes, because it makes it seem like there's something wrong with me. And also sometimes maybe I don't want you to pray for my disability. Maybe I want you to pray that I get a good mark on this test. So maybe ask me what you want to pray for me for, instead of praying that, oh, I pray that she can walk one day. What if that's not what I want? You know, I think like people in our community should try to acknowledge that like disabled people and disabled Muslims, their goal in life is not to like walk. Like that's such like a boring goal to have. Like we have so many other aspects and aspirations and goals that we're trying to achieve. And you know, it's like wishing for people to be like you is kind of uh not selfish, but it's kind of like a little bit like self-absorbed in a way. I know their intentions are good, but like we have to like kind of remember that we're media is only exposed to the norm, and we don't see that there's so many people with disabilities out there living their best lives, and that's possible for people. And of course, I'm not saying that everyone with a disability is having like this amazing life with no boundaries and stuff. Of course, there's people who are, you know, due to their health or due to the community they're in, or due to their financial situation, unable to do these things, and we should acknowledge that too, of course. But immediately jumping to like, we'll pray for your disability to go away, that's not the right way to go about it. And instead, also, you could like actually support them, maybe, you know, by learning about their disability, or financially, or, you know, teaching your kids not to stare and how to ask questions. Those are better ways, I think, to be there for someone who has a disability.
I think language is so important. And you said self-absorbed. The word that came to my mind was insensitive. I think how people communicate can be so harmful without them knowing, whether it's intentional or not. I think it is important to teach our community members and people in all spaces what the best way to communicate is. And like you said, the best way is to ask, but how also do we ask those questions? We don't want to be invasive. We don't want to pry. We don't want to hurt others' feelings, whether it be intentional or unintentional. So educating everyone on that, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah.
And we're almost, I guess, at the end of this beautiful talk. What would you say, Lexi, are some of the major takeaways for people who may be new to the discussion on intersectional discrimination with respect to colonialism and ableism?
I think it's like important to remember that we all start somewhere. You know, prior to this whole live meeting, I was a bit nervous myself because, you know, even though I am a woman with a disability who has immigrant parents, who's Afghan, and this should all come so easy to me, I had to do my own research about things. And I had to make sure like what I was saying was accurate and like correct, and we should like make sure we take the time to do our own research without, you know, exhausting people of the community to do the research for us. And like, especially if you're not part of that community, you know, Google's available, or even expanding like your friend group and learning from people around you, and like actually taking time to, you know, talk to that person who's like sitting alone and, you know, not being approached by other people, or like the one girl in the class in a wheelchair like me. I like constantly when I was growing up, my friends, they'd always tell me, you know, at first I was very hesitant to approach you. I didn't know how to approach you. I thought it would like offend you in some way. But now that like I'm talking to you, I'm learning so much, and I realize like how alike we are. And like, to be honest, I was at first seeing your wheelchair more than I was seeing you, but now I realize that I have to see both of you if I want to be your friend. And, you know, that's something that I'm starting to accept. And I really appreciate that my friends can like think in such a way, because growing up, I didn't always have friends like that. And they'd either see like only the girl or only the wheelchair. And both of those can be problematic because you kind of have to accept both of it. But like they were able to acknowledge their biases and acknowledge that, hey, we were wrong about this thing, but we learned. And I think that's very like inspirational and important to be able to acknowledge that you were wrong, but you're trying to learn. And I think that's what stops people a lot of the time, because they don't want to admit they were wrong. They think being wrong means I was blatantly racist or I was blatantly ableist. And that might be true or it might not be true, but what's important is that you're able to, you know, reconcile and take action on how to move past that.
That is very true. I think the shame, quote unquote, in being wrong stops people from maybe even speaking up or asking some questions. But there is so much power and empathy in owning what mistakes you might have had or biases that you might uncover in yourself and moving forward from there. So thank you again, Lexi, so much for your incredible insights and perspectives. We are so honored to have had you here today. We've all learned so much, myself included, I think myself especially. Thank you all for joining us tonight for another session of our Exploring Our Intersection series, and we will see you next month, inshallah. Take care, everyone. Assalamu alaikum and good night.